ability of hospitals and other healthcare providers in complying with existing regulations is always under a shadow. A chronic shortage of medical facilities for a growing population results in medical institutions remaining woefully overstressed and understaffed. Emotive and stressful environments contribute to a difficult working scenario. We asked Dr. Trehan of Medanta Medicity on some of the challenges which hospitals are likely to encounter and what measures they have taken.
You know, fire regulations are there and they are quite stringent, which is good, which is very good. In addition to fire, for the safety of the facility, for the safety of the patients, there is a very elaborate access control. So with the access control, there is different authorization for different people so that only those people will enter areas who need to be there. One of the big things that we also want to control, which is very high priority for us, is people bringing in infection from outside. You need to regulate entry of personnel, the number of personnel who will come in, the quality of people who will come in, and are they a threat to the facility or not. So I think the RFID, the access control, the biometrics that we have for all our employees, their entry into the hospital is from biometrics. So I think these elaborate security measures which are available are all incorporated into the system. They only add to the safety, the security and the comfort of the people and patients and employees and families who are actually residing inside the facility.
The risk of physical harm and reputational damage is a credible phenomenon, as not every hospital is well funded or well equipped. Incidents such as the Amri Kolkata fire underscore the frail infrastructure oversight, and incidents of high billing of patients point towards lack of adequate transparency. How will healthcare providers respond to these challenges and perception changes is what India Risk Report will address in today's episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India Risk Report, and in this episode we are looking at health and security issues connected with the entire Medicare system in India, which is large. India's healthcare system today stands at about $100 billion and is expected to grow very rapidly by 2020 to about $280 billion. But there are several hazards and several risks attached to the healthcare system. Risks such as strikes by medical employees and hospital employees, and going thereafter to biochemical hazards, structural hazards, fire hazards, and also digital security risks, as well as various other data protection issues that are important in today's world. And we have two hands-on experts, as always, to discuss this issue in greater detail. We have with us Commander Navneet Bali, who is the Director, Northern Region for Narayana Healthcare Super Speciality, the whole services that they're offered across the country. And we have Captain Gary Singh, President, Iris Consulting, regular on our show, and Gary is a person who takes a lot of interest in the security related issues in the healthcare sector. So Gary, broadly speaking, what would you identify to the viewers as areas that you have repeatedly come across as areas of concern in the healthcare sector which are not being attended? There is one side of the news which comes, which is all the bad news about patients' complaints and healthcare and hospitality and the Medicare sector not living up to the expectations of a lot of people. But there's another silent side to it which people like you get to see. What are those?
I think first of all, we all acknowledge that safety, security, hygiene, everything requires special attention. And when I look at hospitals, hospitals are special places. Why? Because they not only do day-to-day work in terms of a lot of negativity being turned into positivity by giving better health. There is huge pressure. Everybody inside is under pressure. The relatives of the patient, the doctor themselves. So there is a huge bit of high pressure zone that we're looking at. So hospitals need special treatment. That's something which I will say. Secondly, what happens in terms of the overall aspects which are ongoing in hospital, if they need special treatment in all those aspects, India as a country has not woken up to that fact. We had challenging situations when there have been, just imagine, such bad fire incidents in hospitals, and patients cannot run out on their own. That means you get more casualties. We had silly incidents of kids being swabbed. So we in India are looking at everything in hospital which can go wrong. We want to be a hub for medical tourism. We, even if have the right doctors, the right nurses and everything right, unless we get rid of this safety concerns, security concerns out of our hospitals, we're not going to things get right in terms of medical tourism, getting the international folks to come and get treated. So I think that's maybe an opening thing. We got the right talent medically, but we also need to ensure the management, security and everything else is attached to it, so that we realize the dream of taking care of our own citizens well, and possibly the global world looks at us as a great medical tourism place.
Well, Commander Bali, this is not a very happy note we've begun on as far as hospitals are concerned. Also, to add little more fuel to the fire, there is the AMRI hospital incident in Kolkata, which had more than 90 people dead. But actually, what is equally, I think, a challenge for you is to live up to the expectations of the patients, because a lot of patients continue to complain. And one of the things that has emerged is that often it's a case, a point Gary brought out about hospital and medical tourism. I've seen myself in a lot of hospitals that they're flooded with foreign patients today, and therefore there could be communication issues also, because they don't really are able to express themselves as fluently in English or Hindi. So how do you cope with all the challenges that Gary's brought out and this point that I brought out?
Sir, basically, I will divide the risks in three parts. One is the medical risks, which the doctors and the nursing staff and the paramedical staff are supposed to address. Second are the non-medical risks, like fire, earthquake, physical disasters, mob violence, etc., etc. And the third risk is the risk which emerges out of the data security breach. I think slowly and steadily, all good hospital chains across the country have started waking up to the fact that unless you are compliant to all the regulatory mechanisms, you are compliant as far as the infrastructure requirements are concerned, you are compliant as far as the behavioral patterns are concerned, you are not going to be successful as a hospital. So let us take the first risk, that is the medical part. You have regulatory guidelines from the MCI, you have the doctor bodies which are very clear about how the medical protocols should be followed by the doctors, and all good hospital chains make sure that they do so. Let's come to the second part, the non-medical risks. As for the non-medical risks are concerned, again, before the hospital construction is even started, you got very clear guidelines of how the hospital should be built, what are the fire safety measures to be taken. Then there are a whole lot of licenses that the hospital has to obtain before they even start the hospital. And as for the third risk, I think is coming, and we are looking at it when we see the Facebook episode and all those episodes, that is about the hospital information systems in which the complete data of the patients is addressed. And although I agree with you that there is a whole lot of work to be done, but believe you me, all good hospital chains have started looking at all these three risks with a very, very minute details, and a great amount of work is being done to ensure that this is compliant.
Yeah, so the catchword, operative word in what he has just said is good hospital chains. But there are a large number of hospitals which are either run by the government or run by not so good and efficiently administered bodies, right? And that's where I think a large number of the catastrophes also take place. So, Gary, back to you, how would you address the challenges that hospitals face? I would say the good hospitals do not face these kind of challenges because they are amply funded, and they have the resources to devote to a lot of emergency response mechanisms. But not so good hospital, where the large number of people and a large number of employees also of public and private companies would go to, because good hospitals, so-called good hospitals, if you don't have the kind of insurance covers, are really unaffordable. So how do you address those challenges?
So as of now, if you really look at it, the easiest way to say that how fast you can run and how much height you need to have certain benchmarks. So as of now, while there are a lot of licenses and everything else, I will say it's a clear-cut miss on clear benchmark that every hospital has to achieve in safety, security, hygiene, fire safety, data security, and integration of all these efforts. Now, if you look at the global scenario, there are not many countries who have made laws to ensure all this is followed. Rather, the industry bodies have come up with standards which all hospitals in one voice decide that we will follow it. And these standards, some of the countries also end up making them as bylaws, so that if you are not following them, there's a huge penalization. But the healthcare overall is not operating in isolation as hospital. There are also insurance. Insurance is one of the largest payers to these large hospitals. Rather than the person paying directly, the payment is coming through insurance. So insurance people will not enlist a hospital if not following standards. So the complete system which operates, they have all reached a standard which is clear-cutly benchmarked and all follow it. So somewhere or the other, since the Indian industry has preferred today to look at the standards which Americans and everybody are following, because by getting that accreditation, they're able to say, see how good we are, and they're also able to tell the local expat community and some of the international people, come and get treated with us. I will say still government should look at it. Why to leave it to standard? If we can even make the Bharat standards for pollution and everything else, why not even for the healthcare and medical? So government should take the initiative of putting it up. If government is not doing, still the industry should at least universally come together.
Okay. It's a point we can debate endlessly, but I think it's an important point. But I would like to sort of move a little away from that. And yes, the standards are there, and sometimes there is a bit of a reluctance to accept international standards because they are not approved by the government of India, but not necessarily the government of India's standards would only be the benchmark for the world. So, there is a debate on that, but I think I want to digress a bit, and I want to ask you that there is something called, which is the criticism that a lot of private hospitals have come in for, the private medical industry, that it's very profit-centered, very profit-making approach they have. So, it is not healthcare that they are in. It is basically to use healthcare as a platform to make profits. Now, how would you respond to that criticism?
Two things important here. First of all, I would say that this whole notion about profitability and that the healthcare, the hospitals are making a large amount of money and is I would say slightly misplaced. Obviously, a private institution has to, sort of generate some amount of money to sort of run an hospital. But believe you me, we just commissioned a hospital in Gurugram about some days back, and it takes at least about 2 to 4 years for a hospital to break even then, because the initial costs are going to be high. You put new machines and you want the latest infrastructure, etc., etc. So the whole thing about profitability might be slightly misplaced. Also, secondly, with the regulatory mechanisms now kicking in, and you must have heard about the NPPA getting into the prices of drugs, etc. The implants are now have been capped at a particular price. You can't charge above that. So even there, the margins have come down drastically. Let me also put this point across that we have also started, I'm talking about Narayana Health, that in the bill that we generate and give to the patient, we clearly show the price of the drugs and how much it is discounted even to the MRP, so that the patient is very clear that he is not paying exorbitant prices for the drugs. So I think the answer to this question is that transparency at all levels, and I think we can very well achieve that change of perception that private healthcare is actually not for-profit organization.
Well, anyway, we not only us, but I think that the jury is still out on whether it is a profit-making initiative. But after a break, we'll come back and look at what kind of technology that we need in place to have emergency response mechanisms which should be robust. At the same time, what kind of security threats to hospitals would come from both from the digital end and at the physical end, but that after a break. Welcome back. We continue to have our two experts with us, and we're looking at hospitals and healthcare safety and security issues. Gary, back to you. I think one of the biggest dangers that the medical industry is now facing is about data privacy, is also about the security threat from the digital space, which could range from technology being not working to the level of efficiency, or somebody else moving into your technology spaces in hospital and causing a kind of a situation which would leave the hospitals completely paralyzed and in a flux. So how do you offer the best medical health care by using top-end technology, but still don't get compromised by it?
Sure. I think we are in the era when data is the most valuable commodity in the world today. It has got the power that the most powerful man in the world, which is generally regarded as president of USA, can take his position if the data on Facebook was manipulated. Just imagine if this kind of data about all the citizens or the global people is available about the medical and every other aspect, how much of manipulation the so-called irresponsible corporates can get into, and even up to the extent of, in a modern day warfare, you can even start blocking medicines and start supplying something else. So it can be the biggest disaster which can happen. So that's how at least the US and all the other countries treat data which is linked with healthcare as a very private and confidential data. Even the doctors are not allowed to share among each other. Whereas data privacy, confidentiality, these norms are still a little bit vaguely defined in our constitution, not nailed down to the last particular digit as yet. So I will say it is an unaddressed issue in our country. We need to still form norms on overall situation, and medical records and everything else should come into the same framework. Yes, if the law doesn't exist, that doesn't allows the healthcare industry not to treat the data with confidentiality still. I think they need to look at the global standards of data privacy, data integrity and everything else, and start delivering that to the patient and as well as the staff which works there. I think they should not see that as a choice at all.
Okay, Commander Bali, moving a little away from data privacy, which is, we all know, is a very important subject, and I'm sure your body as well as other top hospitals would be taking all sorts of corrective and preventive measures. But there's another area of concern, which is pilferages and also theft and corrupt practices, which can happen in any large organization. And you are running a group of hospitals. How do you keep an eagle eye on that? How do you prevent it from happening? I'm sure CCTV is there, but CCTV, to my mind, is an overrated tool. You know, I mean, for every CCTV, you have to have that many people just sitting in front of a TV screen and viewing them all the time. And it will probably happen at a time when you're not viewing it. So,
completely agree with you. I think what I would say is that it is a matter of two important factors. One is the culture setting in an organization. I mean, what kind of culture do you set in the organization and your people? And the second is about training. You can have thousands of mechanisms to monitor people. You can have thousands of these gadgets to do all these, things where you tell them that you'll be caught. But I think the basics are not rooted there. The basics are rooted when you hire your employees, when you train them, when you're inducting them. You drive that kind of a culture where the basic root of pilferage and, people trying to, take out things, because, you will understand that there is the equipment in the hospital is very costly. You have huge amount of drugs which can be taken out of the hospital, and now I'm talking about the employees in a particular hospital. But I think it falls and comes down to the basic precinct that if you have a good culture, you have a vibrant kind of a training mechanism, this thing can be addressed at that level. And of course, then you have the technology and you have the one sort deviant behaviors, and when you have an outliers, you can very well discipline them. But it comes down to culture and training.
Gary, in terms of security audits, and I'm sure you would have done where these problems would occur, where earlier problems would occur, which you have talked about, and how have they been addressed, or how have hospitals failed to address them?
So when we look at the overall safety security that hospital has to achieve, unfortunately, it is not thought at the same time when the hospital was being conceived, conceptualized. So security, safety, fire, everything is, and I think this is applicable to all other industries as well, not only to hospitals, but hospitals need it more than others. So this factor comes in much, much later. So the biggest blind spot that we're looking at, security and safety is not part of the design. Rather, it happens so late, by then most of the aspects of hospitals are frozen, and it's a struggle that how many things you can do change or re-engineer at that point of time. Then looking at the main operations when they are going on, I think the hospital administration themselves have started focusing on a lot of other aspects rather than the safety and security, because they are more looking at aspects of a lot of time even the targets coming to them. So their spend on security is only applicable if they have made money which is surplus. Forget about they contributing a dedicated fund which will go for safety security. If they make surplus, I don't know whether they like to celebrate with it or spend on security. That maybe is the choice they're looking at. So that's really demeaning what safety and security is required. So that is a second stage. So I will say the second blind spot is attitude of the management. And third is, yes, we generally lack skills. So a lot of time the person of fire wants to open the door for evacuation, whereas the security guy wants to lock it down because there should not be a theft. So that's a third challenge of operations, that there is no coordination, there is no coming together response. So I know a lot of hospitals actually face a challenge now. Then the bills are going so high, the patients actually in the night just go out of the fire exit and don't return back. And how to get money out of them? So a lot of people have started locking their fire exits. So that's the third challenge. They're not coming together as one unit to respond. It's a lot of piecemeal activities which keep happening in various different parts of the hospital.
Okay, Commander Bali, how would you respond to some of these points? And equally important is a study has shown by the Indian Medical Association that nearly 75% of doctors in India have faced some kind of violence or threat of violence at some point in their careers. So other than these hazards that we hear about, is the physical threat to the doctors, which also is a safety and security issue.
So I'll answer both the parts. First is obviously what Gary has raised, and I would just say that it starts from, as he rightly said, from the time the hospital is constructed to incorporate the security and safety aspects. The second part, as I reiterated, is the government regulatory licensing mechanism, so that hospitals should not be allowed to start unless you have these compliances and licenses in order. The third critical part would be the training of the employees. You can have all sorts of regulatory mechanisms and licenses in place until your employees are trained to face these issues which they face, fire, etc., etc. It will be a big, risk here. But let me assure you, as I said it in the beginning of the talk, that all good hospital chains are now making sure that they are compliant to these regulatory and licensing things as far as fire and other hazards are concerned. And they are very sure, at least at Narayana, I can say that we have a very robust system of auditing and training of our employees. So we make sure that we sort of comply and we are quite compliant too. Coming to the second part, this is a part that because other parts we've talked about is the safety and the security risk to the patients and the attendants. Now let us come to the people who are actually in the hospital, and very rightly said that actual physical assault of doctors, I mean, you can say that 70% of them have faced this. Again, the matter comes to how we communicate with the patients and their attendants, number one. How we talk to them when they are faced with one of their relatives actually not in a very good situation in the hospital, and also having very robust mechanisms. Let us say such a mob or such a things happens. How do the security of the hospital come together to prevent such an untoward incident? Also involving the police and other people in that. I think it's a work in progress.
Okay, so there are a lot of important points that we've covered, and due to paucity of time, we have to wind up. But I think what has really emerged very clearly is that the wisdom is there in the industry and amongst the security experts what needs to be done. But while there is a will at some levels, I think at some other levels they are waiting for a government directive to enforce best practices. And that is very important because safety and security both of the hospital infrastructure and of the patients and the doctors cannot be compromised and cannot be looked at as an afterthought, as Gary rightly brought out, that just because your profit margins are good enough, then you divert money towards that. But it should be part of the package that you offer to the patients in terms of the healthcare, the technical expertise, and the safety and security. Thank you very much for being with us on the show. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.